Time for round two, baby. What is up, everybody? Welcome to my review of Rocky II from 1979. If you have not already seen, about a week ago I did my review of the original Rocky on Valentine's Day, and this week we're going to be going through pretty much the rest of the franchise leading up to the release of Creed III next week, and then of course I will re-rank all of these films once I see the new one. And Rocky II is an interesting movie to talk about in this franchise because it seems to be one of the movies that people are most all over the place with their reception of it. I've seen people say it's their favorite. I've seen people say that it's the most underrated, like, classic chapter in this franchise. I've seen people put it at the bottom of their rankings. It's everywhere. And I'll be honest with you, the few times that I've seen it, even my own reception has kind of shifted a little bit here and there. So really quick, let's dive into a history lesson with Rocky II, shall we? So with the massive success of the first film, obviously going on to win Best Picture at the Academy Awards, the studio was hungry for a sequel. And so it did take a few years, but Sylvester Stallone eventually did write a script for Rocky II. It was originally called Rocky II Redemption, and it pretty much was exactly the film that we got to see here, with the exception of a few details that had to be worked around because of the movie's production. They approached John G. Avildsen, the director of the first film, to come back for this one, but he was busy with Saturday Night Fever, and so seeing that open slot, Sylvester Stallone created a campaign very equal to size of the one that he created to portray the role of Rocky in the first film to be the director of the second film. Studio wasn't so hot on that idea because Stallone had directed a film before that a few years back called Paradise Alley. Didn't go over so well, and so they did not think that he was the best choice for it, but luckily the producers of the film, the producers of the first film, knowing how much Sylvester Stallone, his input, his ideas, his passion for the role and this series led to the success of the first film, they were totally on his side, and eventually he did get that director slot. And this marked the first of numerous Rocky films that was written and directed by Sylvester Stallone himself. And a couple of fun facts about the production that I already hinted at: the whole plot element of Rocky switching from his normal southpaw fighting style over to a right-handed fighter to throw off Creed, and then eventually switching back in the final round to get that last little edge to overcome Apollo Creed for the victory, that was actually something that was not a part of the original script, but was something that they had to put in because of an injury that Sylvester Stallone had sustained, to where he actually tore his left shoulder. Had to get a surgery for it. Surgery was successful, but it was going to be really hard for him to accurately portray a left-handed fighter when he could not really punch left-handed. So that entire element of the plot, that's actually one of the more iconic elements of the final fight of this film, was an afterthought. Another really iconic moment in this film at the end is when Rocky holds up the belt to the TV cameras and says, "Yo, Adrian, I did it!" The whole element of Talia Shire not being at the fight in person was, again, not something that was originally part of the plan. That was not part of the script. But unfortunately, because she was also shooting another movie at the time and had very low availability during the shoot of Rocky II, they had to change up where her character was going to be. And so Sylvester Stallone came up with the idea of having her be at home and watching the fight on broadcast to stay with their newborn son. And Talia Shire filmed most of her scenes in this film towards the end of the production, when all of the fighting had already been filmed.
I was wondering if you wouldn't mind marrying me very much.
What'd you say?
If you wouldn't mind marrying me too much.
So now that the history and fun facts are out of the way, let's talk about the movie itself, shall we? Is this one of my favorite Rocky movies? Is it still one of the lower ones on my ranking? Have I had any change of heart? Do I see the light? Finally, for all those Rocky II fans out there, let's get into it. And starting off with the good, I think that this is one of those sequels that does a very commendable job at keeping the tone and keeping the direction and keeping the feel of the original film in a way that I think Rocky II is actually the sequel in this franchise that feels the most like the original Rocky. And I said it before, I'll say it again, it's almost like the original Halloween paired with Rick Rosenthal's Halloween 2, to where you could cut out the opening little montage of the end of Rocky at the beginning of this film and mash them together, and you can watch Rocky 1 and 2 as like this 3-hour epic, and it'll flow just fine as one story. And that original Rocky is so beloved for a reason, that kind of dramatic tone, while also having that sense of inspiration and having the character of Rocky and everything that he stands for at the center of it. Most of that is translated over into this film pretty well. And for a sequel, and it shouldn't have to be said, but so many sequels unfortunately do not have this quality. For a sequel, it is such a natural progression of the story of the first film, to where every single thing that happens in this is totally sensical. You're like, yeah, that's exactly what would happen. If this was a real life event, this is how things would go down in the next chapter of that story.
You think I beat him the last time? Do you? You got the decision. Man, I won, but I didn't beat him.
Apollo being bitter, and even though he didn't want a rematch because he was shocked by the end of it at how tough of a fight that it was, but his ego and the crowd and his fans and his haters just eating at him, making him just force this into something that's going to happen, and him training harder than he's ever trained before and going out for blood. And also the Rocky Balboa side of things, to where he's achieved everything that he wanted to achieve by the end of that first film. Winning the belt was never the victory. It was about going the distance. It was about winning Adrian's heart. He did all that. There's no reason for a rematch. As he said in the first film, don't want one. But after the trials and tribulations of life, past fame, trying to ease his way back into regular old citizenship in Philadelphia, knowing that even though he went the distance, there's maybe a little bit more distance that he could cover, that would also drive that person to get back into the ring, even though they initially did not have any desire to. And so as far as narrative, as far as tone, as far as just the feel of the movie, I think this is a great counterpart to the original film. This is something that you could say for most of these films, but as far as a dramatic side of his acting ability, this is a really good performance by Sylvester Stallone, especially when you get into the segment where his son has been born prematurely and Adrian slips into a coma. The emotion that Rocky is able to give out, that Sylvester Stallone brings to the character, I think is really effective. It's really touching, and you know, if you've ever had anything along those lines, I would be hard pressed to say you watch this film and not shed a tear along with him. And so from the physical performance to the fighting to all of those qualities that we love about Rocky just being kind of enhanced in here, as well as those really deep emotional moments, I love what Sylvester Stallone was able to bring to this, not only behind the camera, but in front of it. As much as I love that original film, I actually think I prefer the training sequence and the way that the fight itself is executed in Rocky 2. I think it's more exciting. The training sequence with him now being kind of this darling of Philadelphia, and the citizens are cheering him on as he's running through the streets, and he's got all the school children behind him. That's one of my favorite training sequences in this entire franchise, because it just kind of embodies everything that Rocky is. You know, he's this figure that we all look up to. He's this person that stands for so many good things, and just having the whole city rally behind him is just an awesome scene. And the fight itself, with Apollo Creed being much more serious this time, being much more ferocious and hungry for victory, and Rocky having even more to prove this time than he did the first time, I think it makes for a much more ferocious fight, a much more bloody fight. And even though it's not quite as gritty as the first film, with him having, you know, cut his eye open and blood shooting out and things like that, it's a little cleaner. I think that it's more exciting. I think that it's a little bit more vicious. I think that you feel the punches a little bit more in the final act of Rocky 2. And that also goes along with the victory. The victory is very powerful in the first film because it's not your conventional victory. Like I said in my last review, the actual victor of the fight, it's obscured in the background whenever it's told that Apollo Creed wins, and you just kind of see him pump his fist, and you're like, yeah, whatever, what's Rocky doing? You get to this one, not only just the fight, the end of it, to where it's all dramatically slowed down and they both fall, and 1, 2, and they're grabbing, who's going to be able to stand up? That's very effective. But when Rocky actually wins, man, one of the most powerful moments of this entire franchise is whenever he's so happy and so in pain at the same time, when he raises that belt above his head with tears in his eyes and says, "Yo, Adrian, I did it."
Yo, Adrian, I did it!
Oh, right in the feels, baby. And finally, I really appreciated getting to see more of Adrian in this film. The first one was much more about her being in this shell, about her being confined and being shy, and in this film, she's much more out of that. She's in a very confident relationship with Rocky. She eventually gets married, they eventually have a kid, and so all of the different little trials and tribulations that they both go through as a married couple, trying to make all those decisions that us married couples make early on, her being worried for Rocky if he doesn't fight, yet at the same time worried for him if he does fight, all of those little nuances that she brings to how a wife would feel with a husband with that, career choice. I think Talia Shire gets a lot more room to breathe in this one. She's got a lot more to work with. And from here onward, she becomes such an important character and such an important piece of what makes Rocky work that I love seeing her character grow and kind of blossom throughout this franchise, starting with this one. Moving on to the mixed, and the main one that is always a little hard for me to get into completely in this movie is that, man, do they make my boy Rocky look dumb as fuck in Rocky 2. And don't get me wrong, it's in the mix because Rocky has always had kind of that simple-minded charm to him. It's in the first film as well, to where he sees the world through his own kind of interpretation, the way that he explains things, it's all very street level and simple-minded and arguably a little dumb. But they really ramp it up in this one to where he can't fucking read. He's doing commercials and everything. He's like so wooden. I'm Rocky Balboa, and yeah, you should try this product. Can I try it again?
Today, Junior?
He's going to buy his first house, and they only see the open living room, and he's like, hey, we'll take it, and the rest of it's all details. What? And probably my favorite moment of dumb Rocky-isms in this film is when you've got fucking Joe Spinell. He's like, hey, Rocky, man, you gotta get into business. You gotta go start having some condominiums. You gotta invest in condominiums. And fucking Rocky's like, condominiums? I never use them. It's fun. Like, I can get over it and have fun with it. There is a charm to it. I just feel like they took it a little bit far. Like, Rocky's not stupid. He's simple. He's not stupid. And now moving on to the negatives. And the main one for me is that the first half or so of this movie, I think, really drags as far as pacing goes. Whenever you get out of the fight of the first film, which they recap for you in the beginning, so you're like right back into that excitement mode, there's a good 45 minutes of just Rocky getting back to regular old Philadelphia street life, to where he's, taking spit buckets for Mickey, and he's working at the meat plant, and he's doing the little silly caveman commercials. And, there's good moments in there, there's silly moments, there's good character development for him, but it's really, really slow, and it just takes a long time to start to build up to what you really come to see in a Rocky film, which is that inspiration, that fight, the training, and the motivation. This is one of the Rocky films that takes the longest to get to that stuff. Even to the point that when he starts to kind of get back into the fighting, they then hit the brakes again after Adrian has her little health fit, and it becomes 20 minutes of Rocky just kind of focusing on her and reading her books and reading her poems and going to the chapel. And again, important character stuff, good stuff, not stuff that I would skip past. It's entertaining, it's stuff that I value, but come on.
What are we waiting for?
I've also never felt like the change of heart that Adrian has in the last second when she finally wakes up from her coma and she gets to embrace her newborn son for the first time. She was in this situation, she was having turmoil with Rocky for the entire movie because she didn't really want him to get back into the ring. She didn't really want him to feel like that was his only path, and she was worried for him, and the stress and all of that just added to the health fit that she ended up having, the coma, the injury, if you want to call it, that she ended up having. And so her just waking up and immediately having a change of heart and saying, win.
There's one thing I want you to do for me.
What?
Come here.
What?
Win.
As cool of a moment as that is, and the fact that that's the only motivation that Rocky truly needed to really kick it into high fucking gear. Like, narratively, I like that, but execution-wise, I feel like there should have been something else to make that feel earned, like something that she could have heard either him say or somebody else say. Maybe she wakes up from the coma and he's talking with Paulie or talking with Mickey, and she hears them encouraging him, and she hears Rocky saying, no, I got to stay with Adrian. Like something simple like that would have been enough for me. But her just waking up and immediately being the other side of the coin, always felt a little bit lazy. And my final issue with the film, which is not a big issue, it's just something that I've always felt like could have been done with a little more nuance, is that I'm not a big fan at how much of a dick Apollo Creed is in this film.
This man is dangerous. This man is dangerous. I'm dangerous.
When you look at the Apollo Creed character arc and the storyline that we get of him from Rocky 1 to Rocky 4, this is a necessary step for him to get his ego in check, to where he yet again underestimates Rocky, and the treatment towards Rocky is something that definitely adds to his motivation. But there's a very real human reason why Apollo Creed is jumping back into the ring with him, even when all of the experts are telling him, dude, this guy might fuck you up. And that's his, his tender ego. That's him believing that he's the best. That's him wanting to go the distance and prove not only to everybody else, but to himself that he can do this. It's very similar motivations to Rocky, just for different catalysts. And so the fact that from the moment we get into the new storyline here, as soon as the recap of the first film is done, he's just an absolute douchebag. Like, get out of that chair, chump! I'll beat your ass right now! We'll do it right now! Come on, chump! Come on, chump! Tone it down a little bit, man. Because, like, there's a very endearing way to do this story to where you'll totally understand Rocky, you totally understand Apollo Creed, and you could kind of find yourself rooting for either one of them at a time. But Rocky 2 makes it so definitive that Apollo Creed is the villain of this story that, to me, it wasn't necessary. It wasn't necessary to do that. And when you get Rocky 3, and he comes back and becomes a lifelong friend for Rocky, although not too long of a life, and he embraces his loss to Rocky Balboa and embraces how much of a better fighter Rocky was, at least in that night, and uses everything he can to make Rocky a better fighter. I feel like that character arc from 1 to 3 especially would have been so much stronger if this chapter wasn't just so negative with his character. It's to the point where after Apollo Creed loses again and Rocky wins the championship and wins that belt, and the first thing that Apollo Creed does is pat him on the back and raise his arm and saying, yeah, you're a good fighter, or whatever he says in the finale, that doesn't even really feel earned, because he's been so far the other side where Rocky's just a bum, Rocky's a chump, and I'm gonna show you, I'm gonna make you bleed, I'm gonna make you hurt, and then he loses and he's like, yeah, you're a good fighter. So all in all, guys, I think this is a really good movie. I genuinely don't think there's any bad movies in the Rocky franchise, so this is just kind of being consistent with that. But it is one of the sloppier movies, I'll say, in the franchise. Some things about it I absolutely love. I think it's a great counterpart to the first film. It's a very natural narrative progression from the first film. Just a couple of things in there that if they had just made slight little tweaks, I think that this might have had a chance to be a film that I loved even more than the original. But as is, I do think it's a little inferior for a sequel. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed this, please click over here for my playlist of all of my Rocky and Creed franchise reviews. I'm also going to put my most recent Rocky ranking up here for you to check out. If you enjoyed this, please like and share the video and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the rest of my coverage of this franchise and my review of Creed 3 next week. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.